Hello, and today I'm going to teach you how to write a rhetorical analysis paragraph. You'll be doing something similar for discussion board too, so this will be pretty helpful in doing that. If you haven't already, review the PowerPoint on rhetorical analysis, as I will be using some terms here that you'll see in the PowerPoint. And also read this article, Elizabeth Minkel's Too Hard Not to Cheat in the Internet Age, which appears in the second to last essay of the last section of the e-reader on page 193. So if you haven't done that already, please go and do that. What I did like last time is I made a PDF of it so the text is bigger and easier for you to read on the screen. So even before I started reading it, I read the front matter before the essay to learn a little bit about the author to see if she has any credibility. And to me, it looks like she has lots of credibility as she writes for lots of magazines, has some education, and she even writes for New Yorker, which is a top-notch magazine, especially in regards to art, culture, and politics. And then I go down here and see that this article also appeared in the New Yorker, so we have a lot of credibility, which is something you could write about in your rhetorical analysis paragraph. You know, she makes appeals to ethos based on this credibility. Next thing I did is I went through and read it, um, and I made little annotations and highlighted things that I thought were interesting. Anything that I have in bold is a rhetorical device she used. Whether it was successful or not, it's up to you to determine. But so here she makes humor, which would be an appeal to pathos. Or you could just even talk about her use of humor on its own. It doesn't even have to be an appeal to pathos, however you want to frame it. She uses parallelism. She's got the gerund verb and a noun, gerund verb and a noun, gerund verb and a noun. So she's got that going for her. Next thing is she has a brief summary of the article she would respond to. And then around here, she kind of like starting to make what might be her argument, at least in the point of the fact that she's pointing out there's a flaw in the argument of the paper she's responding to. She has a rhetorical question here when she says, really? She has more rhetorical devices here when she uses evidence from her personal experience, talking about how she learned how not to plagiarize. She uses evidence from the article. She kind of implies a claim that maybe the internet's not to blame, but it's just students' ignorance of what plagiarism is, which could be the blame. She uses more evidence from the article. She uses more evidence from the article. She asks another rhetorical question. If every song is sampled, why shouldn't writers do the same? A little more notes in the last paragraph, some more notes in the last paragraph, a little more humor. So I've gone through, and you've already read the essay too, so I won't have to read it to you. I'm just highlighting the things that I did when I go about reading a text before I rhetorically analyze it. So before you rhetorically analyze a essay, you're probably going to want to figure out what the author is trying to argue, what the author's thesis statement is, what they're trying to prove. Sometimes the thesis statement is explicit and they'll just have like a sentence that just flat out says what they're going to try and prove. Sometimes it's implicit, like this article is here. So I think her implied thesis statement is this. The internet is not the cause of students plagiarizing, as the article Plagiarism Lines Blur for Students in Digital Age, which is the article she was responding to, claims, but rather the students' lack of understanding of plagiarism is the blame. So we have a thesis. Now what we want to do is figure out, do the rhetorical devices she used throughout her essay, are they effective in helping her prove her thesis statement? So a rhetorical analysis essay is essentially you trying to determine whether the argument process the author uses is effective or not, or parts of it are effective and parts of it are not effective. Put them together as an overall effective, whatever you want to do. You will not be inserting your opinions in your rhetorical analysis essay other than your argument, other than your analysis of the argument. So you won't be saying whether you agree or disagree with the author. You leave that out. This is a completely objective, just analysis of how the author puts the argument together. And in your research paper, that's where you can start having opinions. But in this, you will not be arguing against the author's opinion or for it. You'll just be arguing about the argumentation process the author uses, the rhetorical devices they use, and whether they were used well or not. So what are some of the rhetorical devices she used? I pointed some of them out as we went through the PDF, and here are the ones that I noticed. Maybe you noticed some more. Rhetorical devices, she used rhetorical questions such as, really? And other questions she had. We went over the credibility. She's educated and writes respected journals. But you might want to ask yourself, we're in the internet age, and the article came out in 2010, so that's like 7 or 8 years old. Is it still valid? Is it still up to date? Maybe it's out of date, and therefore it loses some credibility. It's not worthwhile. It's a question you want to ask yourself. She uses some evidence, another rhetorical device. She uses parallelism in that sentence I showed you with the gerund verbs and the noun. And she uses humor, which I pointed out with all the ha-has, right? So we've got a list of things, and maybe your whole essay is going to be about this. You know, maybe you'll have a paragraph on rhetorical questions, a paragraph on ethos, a paragraph on evidence, and a paragraph on humor. Maybe not in parallelism since you only used it once. But, you know, this could be the sketch of your whole rhetorical analysis essay. But what we're doing today is trying to figure out how to write just a rhetorical analysis paragraph, which you'll be attempting to do on discussion board too. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you write your rhetorical analysis paragraph is you are going to want to make a claim, which is like the thesis statement for the paragraph. If in your larger rhetorical analysis essay, you'll have a thesis statement in your introduction, and then each claim will be like support trying to prove that thesis statement. But for now, we're just going to do a paragraph, and we have to make a claim. What are we going to rhetorically analyze? I decided I'm going to rhetorically analyze rhetorical questions, right? So I wrote this sentence here. 2 times in Minkle's short essay, Too Hard Not to Cheat in the Internet Age, she uses rhetorical questions to undermine the logic of the article, Plagiarism Lines Blur for Students in the Digital Age. So I will be analyzing rhetorical questions, and I will be showing that how they are used and whether they are used effectively. Right? So now I have my claim, my thesis statement for this paragraph. Now I have to prove it. And how you prove it is you use evidence. And for a rhetorical analysis essay, your evidence will come by way of quoting from the essay. In other papers, you might bring in personal experience. You might use statistics, data. You might use other news sources, whatever you want to use as evidence to help prove your point. And then once you have your evidence, you're going to have to explain what that evidence means, especially in relation to trying to prove your claim up above. So every rhetorical analysis paragraph is going to have a claim. It's going to be followed by evidence. It's going to have an explanation to help us understand how the evidence proves your claim. And then you'll have a conclusion sentence. Often this explanation will also include in your essay, in your larger essay, not only will you explain how this evidence supports your claim, but how it all overall supports your thesis statement. So every paragraph is going to be structured just like this. So you'll have at least 4 sentences per paragraph. Okay, so what do I have to do next? I have to provide some evidence, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to go right back here. The first rhetorical question was really, so maybe that's a good place to start. So my first piece of evidence is going to be that quote, and I will write my sentence like this. The first occurrence of a rhetorical question is just a one-word question, really? And you will notice that I have the quote in double quotation marks, which is followed by the page number in parentheses, and then it's followed by a period. So make sure that you have your page numbers after your quotes. So I have just given my first bit of evidence, but it kind of needs a little contextualizing. The reader of this paper might not quite understand why is that a rhetorical question. So I just gave it a little bit more, I added a little bit of information to the evidence. The question is posed as a response to what she believes is a misleading claim the internet is to blame for students who plagiarize. So now we've got our bit of evidence. What does this mean? How does this support our claim? The reader wants to know. So now we have to go about explaining how this evidence supports our claim. So I wrote this. On its own, the question may not seem successful, but when she backs it up with her experience of how she was taught not to plagiarize and how to discern what is or is not an acceptable source, she shows how today's students are not being taught well about plagiarism. Thus, she establishes that it is a student's ignorance of plagiarism for why he or she plagiarizes, indicating that the internet is not to blame, right? So I've kind of explained my point. I've explained what the evidence means in relation to my claim that the internet is not to blame. And this is how she's going to, the internet is not to blame, it's really the student's ignorance. So, all right, so we've explained that. Now, we could stop here and just go right to our conclusion. But I'm going to bring in that other piece of evidence because the more evidence, the better, right? So my next piece of evidence is going to be that second quote, right? Towards the end of the article, she asks another rhetorical question. And this another right here kind of acts like a transition word. It connects them and lets me know we're changing a little bit in our thought. Towards the end of the article, she asks another rhetorical question. If every song is sampled, why shouldn't writers do the same? And so the obvious answer is because they're not the writing and singing are not the same thing. So that's the implication of the rhetorical analysis question. So now we have to explain how this kind of proves our claim. So I wrote this. This question confronts the logic of the article she is responding to by pointing out a false equivalency. Songs in academic writing, such as a Psych 101 paper, are not the same thing. Again, the underlying assertion is that students are ignorant of plagiarism, especially in regards to writing academic papers. So I've shown how it undermines the logic of the article and the other essay, while also showing how it backs up her thesis statement, lack of understanding, right? So I've explained on a twofold level. So we've got our claim, right? Got claim, we have evidence. Maybe I'll do this. Let's just do this. We got claim. We've got some evidence. We've got some explanation. We got some more evidence. And then have one more explanation, right? So we can see how it's panning out. Claim, evidence, explanation, evidence, explanation. Looks good, right? All this paragraph needs now is a conclusion. So in the conclusion, you're just going to kind of wrap it up and just kind of restate how you prove your point, which is that how she used rhetorical questions effectively. So by using rhetorical questions, she highlights flaws in the article she is trying to disprove, while showing how the internet is not to blame for plagiarism, but students' ignorance of plagiarism is where the blame should lie. So that is how you should go about writing your rhetorical analysis paragraphs. Claim, evidence, explain, conclusion. So when you're doing your discussion boards, you're looking at those pictures, maybe you're just going to focus on ethos, and you're going to show how it makes an appeal to ethos by writing a paragraph something along these lines. All right. Hope again that this was helpful. Good luck with everything. Again, if you have questions, you can email me, you can use the Twitter, or you can use the chat on Canvas. Thanks.